This episode of the Vincast, as always, is supported by Vinus, the iPhone app which recognises any wine with just the snap of a photo. I'm sure you've been in a situation out at a wine bar or a restaurant where you've really enjoyed a wine, but the next day or several days later you can't remember what the wine was and you'd really like to buy it. Well, the iPhone is a fantastic tool with which you can take a photo of that label, but the Vinus app is even better because it recognises what the wine is and you can track it and log it and share it with one of the fastest growing networks of wine lovers out there. It is for users in Australia and New Zealand exclusively, and with the app you can actually find out where you might be able to buy it and what you might expect to pay for that wine. I suggest going to www.getvinus.com/Vincast, download the app, and you can just see how easy it is, and not to mention the fact that it's free. Vinus is changing the way people enjoy wine. Hello there, Vincasters, and welcome back to another episode of the Vincast, the podcast all about wine, wine culture, and wine people. My name is James Gersbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and I do hope you guys had an absolutely fantastic Christmas, sharing some wonderful food and, more importantly, wines with family and friends. And if you listen to this episode the day it goes up, have an absolutely fantastic New Year's Eve tonight, and crack open a really good bottle of wine because we don't get the opportunity to celebrate New Year's very often. As always, I really appreciate you guys keeping in touch with me via Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and even the website as well. And when new episodes go up, I always appreciate it when you also share it. So that's a retweet or a share or like on Facebook. Comments always appreciated. It's been fantastic to get some feedback, but also some appreciation for the guests that I have on the podcast who do very generously donate their time to be on a podcast talking about themselves, essentially. Not something that I think many people really enjoy that much. So for this episode, I actually have got someone who I admire a lot. His name is Anthony Danna. His family have been running a very successful wine business, retail business out in Balwyn, which is in the eastern part of Melbourne, and particularly well known for Italian wines, which Anthony more recently has actually been importing as well with Mondo Imports. They also own Hoddles Creek Estate out in the Yarra Valley, which makes some beautiful Chardonnays and Pinot Noir. And so he came on board the podcast and talked about his background growing up with wine and food and that Italian kind of heritage, his love of all things Italian wine. And it was a really fascinating chat. So I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you on the other side. Anthony, thank you very much for joining me today on the Vincast. I know how busy you must be heading into Christmas with all the businesses, but I really appreciate your time.
No problem at all. It's always good to get in and to get out of the environment and, take an hour or two just to reflect on, what a crazy time, but also, how much we've done in the last few months. So, no, thank you.
But going right back, what is your kind of earliest memory of wine in your life? Obviously, it's been around.
Yeah, it's been around for
all your life.
Our grandparents, on both sides had vineyards in Calabria. My father, in 1963 with his brother opened a mixed grocery store. So I've always been around wine. Where our current setup is at Boccaccio, where we moved 6 months ago. I was, born and raised upstairs. So it's something that, for me, it's always been a part of my whole life. So there's no moment where I could say, right, this is where I was introduced to wine. Wine to me is something that's been with me from birth. So
was it always something you knew you would kind of go into, or was there a crystal moment that kind of made you go, yes, I love wine, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, look, not really. I'm lucky that I've had a father that's, let me run my own race. So, basically, when I was doing my last year of school, I actually did university accounting. So, it was good in a way in that then I didn't have to do any accounting for 2 years. So
yeah.
I had 2 years at uni where I basically just, revolved around food and wine, but it was only until probably, my fourth year that I decided, I want to join the family business and, make wine my life. So, up until that stage, any holiday was, always with my father, selling wine. So, and same with my twin brother. And, my twin brother, I did a 5-year degree. He did a 3-year degree. After 3 years, he went to Hoddles Creek and he's never left. For me, I did 5 years, and then after 5 years, working at Boccaccio, I started Mondo. So it's been an evolution the whole way through.
Now, obviously, your family is of Italian extraction from Calabria. Were you born in Italy?
No, my parents were born in Italy, and they came to Australia as young children. So it's funny to think that they've spent more time in Australia than in Italy. But obviously, the Italian way is a big part of our life and my family life. So it's funny. I went back to Calabria, to my mum's house last year, and I consider myself an Italian Australian, but the connection wasn't the same as when I visited my mum's house. I thought, God, I'm really not that Italian. I'm more Australian, so that was a bit of a culture shock. So
yeah, were you a bit disappointed?
No, not disappointed. Probably in a way more proud. So
cool.
And I took my children there and my wife. So it was an emotional visit, but it also made me appreciate and love what we do in Australia and love what I do, and that I can have the best of Italy in Australia. So
are both of your parents originally from Calabria?
Yeah, both from different parts. So
different parts?
Yeah, so mum from Guttanzardo, my father from Reggio, so they met in Australia.
Okay.
My father and his brother delivered bread to all the migrants when they arrived in Australia, so, and groceries and olive oil. So
was there a big kind of migration from Calabria, basically?
Massive,
was this sort of post World War II?
Yeah, in the 50s. So like in Calabria in the 50s, there was nothing. So almost like in Italy today, where you see so many Italians come out to Australia.
Yeah.
Because there was no hope, there was no future. Well, it was the same with my family in the 50s. So they knew they had to get out of there, to have a better life. So they came here literally with, the shirts on their back. So
not with their parents? They came
with their parents,
okay.
But just...
and it was basically like a huge boat. And basically, most of the people from Calabria had relatives, got onto a boat, and they all came to Melbourne.
Yeah, they all came to most from our village came from Melbourne. They came to Melbourne, and that was it. They had relatives that was here, so it was basically really community based, and they all helped each other, and they all prospered, which is in today's generation, it's sort of something that we don't think about. It was a totally different way of life. So.
Did they tend to, the Calabrians, do they sort of have their own communities?
Not
or
really,
was it
no,
just
all
sort
mixed.
Of an Italian community?
No, Italian in general. So
right.
I don't think, I think, growing up Italian in the 50s and 60s wasn't like it is today.
No.
Today being Italian, is something to be proud of and something to be cherished. In the 50s and 60s, a lot of them almost didn't want to be Italian. It was...
really?
It was a totally different way. Everything was a lot different to what it is now. Now Italian culture is embraced. In the 50s and 60s, I think, it was a bit different. So, they're from their villages are so small in Calabria. You see where they come from, and you're like, God, how the hell did they end up where they are in Australia? So
I guess it's really important to consider that the accessibility to stuff that they were so familiar with, just food and beverages, is just, they didn't have it.
No, they had but even in Italy as well, they used to eat, meat was something they ate once a week. My mum at the age of 5 or 6 and 7, would do cooking because my grandma would be in the fields all day, and my grandfather, had left and come to Australia to try and work, and then my mum and my grandmother came over 8 or 9 years later. So my mum didn't really see my grandfather for the first 8 years of her life. So, the sacrifices they all made to come to Australia was pretty massive. So,
where was the original business based?
The original business, actually didn't have a shop front. It was almost like a virtual business. So they operated. They bought bread and then delivered the bread to, all the migrants that had arrived in Australia. And from bread, they started selling them olive oil and then wine. And then they bought their first property in Flemington, which was called Dana Brothers. and it was like that for 30 years. And then we had another store in Reservoir, and then we built Balwyn in 74. And it was a massive risk, and everyone in the Italian community was like, God, how stupid are these people? You know, building an Italian supermarket and wine store in Balwyn, it's you know, they'll go broke within the first 12 months. So
yeah, if you don't know, Balwyn is it's very white bread. It's very middle class. I know my grandparents, who were very conservative, they lived there for many years. Actually in North Balwyn, but you know, it's very much sort of white picket fence.
Yeah. It's not Brunswick. It's not Coburg. It's not an area that had a lot of Italians or
it's not ethnically diverse.
Spot on, yeah. So in the 70s, it was probably more so. So it was a massive risk, and in the end, it's, you know, basically now that's become our major store. So, you know, basically Boccaccio is the hub for all our businesses. So, you know, all our wholesale, all our international staff, all the importing, you know, the headquarters is Boccaccio, and then everything branches out from that. So,
at what point did they start working with wine or alcoholic beverages?
I think it would have been in the late 60s. So Boccaccio was established in 1963. In the late 60s, I would have been selling alcohol. So but it was, you know, they used to buy barrels from, you know, dairies in McLaren Vale and bottle things themselves. So it was a different way of doing business.
Okay. And obviously, even in the late 60s and the 70s, wine consumption was pretty different to what it is now.
Yeah.
Was there even any Italian? Did people kind of think of Italy when they thought of wine?
No. It was most of it was fortified.
Yeah.
And spirits, and it was only sort of late 70s or early 70s that you know, the table wine became more popular. And even
what about Masala?
Yeah, Masalas. I still remember my grandma drinking Masala, and but it was, in the scheme of things, it wasn't a massive seller. So it's not like, it was very
wasn't as big as like sherry and port and that kind of thing.
Yeah, they were big.
Yeah.
And beer was big. You know, the amount of, you know, people that tell us they used to buy 8 or 10 dozen VB long necks at a time. You know, those
Jesus.
It makes you think. It's where you have 6 tins of Peroni and think that's a good start. You know, so.
Well, yeah. I mean, I always think about the fact that you look at big hotels and stuff like that, and you think how they used to have massive parking lots next to them, and you just don't see it anymore.
No, you don't. No, that's gone, isn't it?
Yeah, which is good. It's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree entirely.
And when did they? So the wine kind of grew as part of the business. Yeah. At what point did they sort of think, you know, maybe we should start making some of our own?
Well, we didn't plant Hoddles until 97, so
okay.
It was
I thought it was a bit older than that.
No,
it feels like it's been around a long time.
Yeah, it is. We've had the land since 69.
Oh, okay.
They bought the land. My grandfather on my father's side was a big believer of natural springs. Mm-hmm. So Hoddles had 2 or 3 natural springs running through the property.
Okay.
It still does. So when my grandfather saw that, he said, you know, to my father and to my uncle, like, you got to buy that property. So they bought it, and basically we just you left it, and then in 97, when my twin brother and I were on university holidays, with the help of Mario Marson, who was at Mount Mary at the time, we planted the first 12 acres at Hoddles, so Pinot Chardonnay and Pinot Blanc. So,
well, for one thing, when the family bought the property in the Yarra Valley, there really wasn't a lot going on. There was maybe a handful of producers who are now kind of have a bit of a cult status. Yeah. But particularly up in that part of the Yarra Valley, it's pretty elevated and a bit cold. And so, the only other one around, I think I actually had Andrew on an early episode, and I think it was the late 70s.
Yeah, that would be. Yeah, they've been, as a vineyard and as a winery, you know, Upper Yarra, they're basically the pioneers. So it's funny how much it's changed, where, you know, the frosts and all that used to be so bad that I reckon on our side, if we'd planted vines in the 70s, we would have lost every second vintage. Yeah. You know, obviously as the climate's warmed a little bit, Upper Yarra, which is so cool, is still cool, but it's at a point now where for us it's perfect for Pinot and Chardonnay. So we planted it in 97, and my twin brother never left. So,
how did you and Frank decide, what you guys were going to be doing?
I don't know. It just there was sort of no communication, and we just He did his university degree, which was 3 years, and then
What did he study?
he studied straight commerce.
Okay.
I did com arts, as I said. I picked the longest degree I could find, and he did a year of retail at Boccaccio. Absolutely hated retail, and did Hoddles and stayed out there. So it was he's never left. So he did viticulture by correspondence, and after about 5 years of retail, I saw there was obviously a gap. And especially Southern Italian wines, it's something that was so thin on the ground. So when we set up Mondo, we set it up to focus on Southern Italy especially. And it's sort of, everything's just evolved. It's amazing how, there was, I didn't have a plan to say, this is what I want to do in 5 years' time. This is what I want to do in a year's time. Everything's just sort of evolved the way it's gone. So in 5 years' time, there'll probably be, or hopefully another chapter, in our family business where something else is involved. So,
what were your early kind of drinking habits, patterns, interests?
I've always loved
was wine introduced to you even sort of before you were technically legally allowed to drink it?
Yeah, 100%. It's always been, wine's always been.
Was it that typical Italian kind of philosophy of that, the wine in particular is part of the meal? It's not, an alcoholic beverage per se.
Spot on, yeah. So even, like I know with my kids are 7 and 3, if I've got a glass of red or a glass of wine in my hand, they'll always ask me, can I have a sip? Can I try it? And they'll give feedback. So it's the same. I was the same as my kids. It was something that, it was always a natural thing. It wasn't when we got to 18 or 16 or 17, okay, you can now drink. My father always let me have a sip of wine to try it. My kids is the same. I'll always let them have a sip and try champagne and, try red wine, try white wine. I think it's a healthy way of living rather than getting someone to abstain until they're 18 and then say, right, go for it. So
isn't there like an Italian saying about, it's not a dining table if there's no wine and no bread or something like that?
Yeah, I agree. Well, it's definitely the case in our household. So the first thing I do when I walk through doors is before I take off my shoes or do anything is open a bottle of wine. So, and we always have multiple loaves in the house. So with Boccaccio, we've got 3 different bakers. We've got an Austrian baker, an Italian baker, and a guy who bakes all the normal breads. And we've always got so many loaves in our house. I can't eat unless I have bread and a glass of wine.
Initially, what sort of challenges did Boccaccio face, particularly like when it moved into Balwyn?
Yeah.
And they would have been fairly conservative drinkers, not conservative in terms of volume, perhaps, but in terms of what they were actually drinking. What were the challenges?
Well, I think Boccaccio early on, we probably catered for that clientele really well in that Darrenberg and Taylor's and Tabilk and all those were probably our biggest selling wines, and they're fantastic wines. I think the biggest challenge has been in the last 10 years last 10 or 15 years where our business has moved towards, at a retail level, more European wines.
Okay.
And it's really educating our customers and, doing something we love. Like, we love Australian wines, and we also love Italian wines. And so it's saying to our customers who normally may drink Shiraz, fantastic, try a glass of this or try a bottle of this and see what you think. So I think the biggest challenge we've faced at a retail level at Boccaccio in the last 10 to 15 years is introducing that continental or that greater continental element to it. And I think if we hadn't have done that, I think our business today would be very different to what it would have been if we didn't do it. So it was just a really, well, I wouldn't say clever because we didn't even know we were doing it. We sort of just basically said to ourselves, like, this is what we have to do.
I find it interesting that wine retail seems to be going through a bit of a renaissance, for lack of a better word. When you look at kind of what wine retail was in sort of the late 80s and 90s with sort of the birth of Dan Murphy's and then the subsequent purchase of that to become, one of the 2 leading retailers in terms of alcoholic beverages and wine in particular, that you have now a lot of these independent sort of, in some cases quite small, very sort of edgy, really trying to establish themselves as being quite different. Boccaccio for me kind of sits outside of that because it's always been a kind of a fringe retail outlet. Because it's not super close to the city. So it's a bit more of a destination kind of shop. But sort of with that kind of specialty focus. Yeah. While still kind of being accessible.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and that's always been. I hate alienating, and I hate we'd never do only Australian or I think you've got to offer something for everyone, and with prices as well. We've got wines that start at Italian wines that are $8, and we also have Italian wines at $800. And I think that's one of the things that people love about Boccaccio, that it's almost like heading into a bit of a treasure chest and see what you can pull out. There's so many different wines, and there's so much variety, and we also pride ourselves on not gouging people. That our prices are fair, and our service is good, and if you offer all the people the right all those right characteristics, well then you've got no reason for them to go anywhere else. So I think the customers that come to Boccaccio love coming to Boccaccio and love supporting a family-owned independent business, which they probably don't get the same feel and love if they went to a Dan's or VC's or something like that. So, but I think as well, a lot of it's cyclical in that. I think some of these stores that start off like Dan's, that started off at one store and is now at 100 stores. They become like the Titanic, and they can't be as progressive and fast moving as a lot of the smaller independents. And that's why I think as that happens, there's always room for smart independents. And Blackheart and Sparrows are someone that a business that I respect greatly, and how they've been able to adapt and do what they do. And there's lots of really good independents. And as a fellow independent and as an importer, I love supporting the independents. And we've had offers from all the majors to sell almost on a yearly basis, and we would never sell out. And same with our importing arm and our winery, we would never sell to the majors. I think it's great to support small independent family businesses. And that's what we try and do across all our businesses.
It's interesting you sort of describe it as like a treasure chest. From what you've you painted a really fantastic picture a few weeks ago of what the old kind of Boccaccio Cellars was, in terms of it was a much smaller space and really sort of packed in. So I can imagine kind of, I never got to see it, unfortunately. The old Europa Cellars in East Melbourne. There's sort of, it's a bit dark, and there's just boxes everywhere, and you kind of just, maybe you go digging and you find something and go, what's this? And they say, oh, geez, I forgot we even had that. Was that kind of what it was back in the day?
To a degree, but also, I suppose, because a lot of wholesale was done, our wholesale business has grown at a massive extent, and the winery and Boccaccio, so we were literally out of room. So there was so much stuff. We have a massive underground cellar, and so much wine in that cellar wasn't featured on the shelves of Boccaccio. So, to me, I almost thought that, as well, that we're doing our customers a disservice in the fact that we had so much great wine that unless you took a customer down to our cellar, which was not always practical, they didn't realise it was there. So that's one of the things I love about our new space, is that everything that we have in our cellars, is available to purchase and is available in store. So, it gives me a real kick to bring up these old wines, and when we put them out, and people's eyes lit up when they saw it. So
mine certainly did when I first saw some of those bottles. How long has the new cellars been in the works for?
About 2.5 years. So we had to wait 25 years to buy the remaining freehold property in our group of properties, and it was smack bang in the middle.
Right.
So we bought it 3 years ago, and we started planning. So the planning took 2.5 years, because if we were going to do it, we had to do it right. So solar panels on the roof, CO2 refrigeration. It's as green and as efficient as any supermarket in the world. So, I think, to me, that other supermarket and wine store served us well for 40 years. You know, hopefully this next one can serve us for the next generation of our family. And we weren't going to do something and do a half a job. So so wrapped in how the first stages has panned out, and to think there's 2 more stages to follow, which will be as good as our wine store. You know, puts a big smile on my face.
I like that. You know what you've described, how everything's just going to work together, and it's going to be just this. Yeah, what I think of as a gastronomic paradise. Yeah, because you know you can go in on a Sunday and you can go and taste some really amazing wines, which is what I did yesterday. Tasted some beautiful Barolos, and then you can walk through and you can see all these beautiful meats hanging. You can see bread being baked fresh. You can go and taste some stuff. I can imagine it's just going to really energize that whole area, because you know I went to school just down the road, and I remember you know the Coles on the corner of High Street and Burke Road was just sort of, you know, like any other Coles, it's just kind of a bit soulless.
That was the first Coles in Australia.
Really?
To think that, you know, Coles, a massive corporation, that Boccaccio has been able to flourish. You know, that was their first store. So, you know, one of the things with our new supermarket is that the first thing you do when you walk into that supermarket, you're going to see 300 legs of prosciutto hanging. Amazing. You know, and that's a statement to say you have arrived in a European supermarket. But like our wine store, we haven't said, okay, you know, it is going to be a European supermarket and there's a prosciutto room and a cheese room. You'll still be able to do your full shop as well. So, you know, everything that is in Coles and Woolies is available and, you know, will be available in Boccaccio. So, you know, all our meat, you know, we get in, it comes as bodies, nothing's bought in a box. And our meat, but our butchers, you know, cut all the meat off the bodies and we sell it. So it's a really natural way of selling food and wine. So our bakers bake our own bread. We try to be as hands-on as possible. So
I can imagine there'd be a lot of people who would come in and just go, oh my God, I never realized that's how it's done. I'm just so used to it being pre-packaged. I can just take it off the shelf and you know, boop, just take it home and cook it. But to actually see it all happening, I think is probably going to be great for people to kind of get a bit more respect for the actual process itself.
Oh, I agree entirely. And to think that, you know, once it's all done, that it'll all be, you know, it'll be a celebration of all that sort of stuff. So, you know, every Sunday we have tastings at Boccaccio. We'll be having food tastings on Sundays and Saturdays, you know, in the new supermarket. So it's, it's been a lot of sleepless nights, but I'm super excited to see, you know, what's going to happen next.
You talk about you sort of, I guess, frustrations in getting access to wines, particularly what led to you kind of starting Mondo Italian Wines of the South. Back in the day, what sort of Italian wines were available in Australia?
Oh, it was very, very limited. So it's, you know, and I think storage and the way those wines were shipped and everything wasn't ideal. So a lot of the time those wines came to Australia in not great condition, which also then gave Italian wines a reputation. So I think if you look at in the last 10 years or 15 years, how, you know, importers gone about bringing Italian wines into the country, it's been fantastic in that the wines arrived in Australia in its best possible condition. You know, when a wine travels half the way around the world and it's not in a refrigerated container, you know, good things can't happen. So it's, you know, the Italian wine scene's changed unbelievably so in the last, you know, 10 or 15 years. And it's, you know, you sell wine, Italian wine, I sell Italian wine. It's a great time to be selling Italian wine. There's so much buzz and so much interest, and that hasn't always been the case, you know, for a number of reasons.
I think back to when I first started working in the wine industry 10 years ago, you know, just a Liquorland store, and pretty much the only Italian wines we had were like Riccadonna.
Yeah, Riccadonna, yeah.
We didn't even have Prosecco.
Yeah.
I think we had Lambrusco maybe, but really shit Lambrusco. And we had, I think, Chianti Ruffino.
Yeah,
even the stuff in the I can't believe they still had it 10 years ago.
Yeah,
the ones in the kind of the
wicker baskets. Yeah.
Oh my god, you know, which is so that kind of cliche. If you watch movies from the 80s and stuff like that. You know, it is that kind of wicker basket with a candle in it.
Yeah,
it's so crazy.
It's changed, and you think today, you know, all the indigenous wines that are sold, Nerello Muscolesi from Etna, and Greco from Calabria, and Magliocco from Calabria, and you know, you go up Primitivo from Puglia. There is so much diversity and so much interest in these Italian wines. 10 years ago, as I said, you could count all the varieties that are imported on one hand.
Do you think that has something to do with the increase in quality and interest in Italian cuisine?
That, and also I think that people are so well educated and travel, and
travel definitely.
The interest in food and wine is in Italian food and wine is at an all-time high, which is fantastic. People are a sponge. They want to know as much about you know, where a wine comes from and where food comes from. That it's fantastic, because it allows us as an importer to bring in some really unique wines and make it commercial, and that people are prepared to buy them. So, you know, when I first imported Bosco 6 years ago, I absolutely loved the wine. I wasn't sure that I had a market to sell those wines, because 5 or 6 years ago, even Etna then was really not an unknown, but not far from being an unknown. Where today, you know,
oh my God, it's
we import it.
Opposite.
Yeah, and it's like a stampede to get the wines. You know, I'm in a way I'm delaying importing some of the single cruise.
Well, the La Maresca as well. It's incredible how it sells out.
Yeah, so you know, I've said to La Maresca as well, like, you know, take on another vineyard, do whatever. I'll buy all of it, because I literally can't keep up. You know, it sells out within 24 hours, which is a good problem to have, but also a bad problem, because so many people aren't getting to try his wine. So
yeah, absolutely. Tell me about sort of the decision to set up Mondo, and if you kind of took a particular principle or philosophy into starting Mondo.
I did. The major philosophy I had is that I only wanted to work with great varieties that are grown in the region they originate from. So I wasn't interested in importing Cabernet or Shiraz.
So no Super Tuscans?
No Super Tuscans, no Chardonnay, no Sauvignon Blanc. Everything had to be indigenous to that region. So, you know, some of the first wines that we started out with were things like, you know, Anlianico from Basilicata and Primitivo from Puglia. They as a commercial, you know, didn't really make as much sense, but I thought that was something that we would not, you know, stray in. You know, going forward, I think Mondo's been going, you know, 7 or 8 years now, that it's exactly the same thing. Yeah. You know, we don't have any Cabernet in our portfolio. Everything is indigenous, and we also wanted to focus on southern Italy. And even though, you know, we do Tuscany really well, you know, Biondisanti and Soldera, two of my favourite producers, you know, southern Italy is something that's been neglected for so long. So our focus on southern Italy was to showcase just the amazing value and the amazing quality you could have at such a low price. So,
well, it's funny actually. When I was traveling over in Europe 2 years ago, you know, I had a very typical kind of Melbourne sort of education of wine, and certainly, you know, even though they're great importers, the importers that I was working with at King & Godfrey when I was buying there were, as you say, sort of focusing a lot on the north, and, you know, absolutely great wines, northern Italy, bit more money, kind of a little bit more investment in improving quality by and large. Southern Italy, unfortunately, was a little bit sort of slow to catch up, but I remember kind of planning ahead and thinking about when I was going to be in the south, because I knew I wanted to go to the south. And, you know, I did go down all the way into Salento in Puglia. I went down to Sicily, you know, I just sort of went, I don't know what there is. And it was so impossible to research. It's just, it was, you know, I just didn't know where to look for stuff. You know, I wish I had have known you then, because you would have been able to introduce me to some amazing stuff. Hopefully I'll get to visit some of these guys in the future. But you know, even 3 years ago, some of these southern Italian regions and varieties was so unknown.
Yeah.
And now some of these, you know, producers that you're working with, Fatalone and Monetieri, they have a real cult following.
Yeah. Well, Monetieri, for example, was to put it in the bluntest terms possible, a peasant farmer that had this amazing vineyard. that was an unknown. And the thing is to think that, his expression of Aliana Gold, which is such an amazing wine, is available under $30 at retail level. When you compare what you have to buy for Barolo and Barbaresco and Brunello, which is north of $100, just shows you just how cheap Southern Italy is, and their prices are still 20 years behind the north. So, it puts a massive smile on my face when I import a producer like Moliteri or like La Moresca or Fatalani, that you just think, God, the value when you see the quality of the wines is unbelievable. So.
Was there also a decision to kind of work with producers who produced wines that were reflective of the area in terms of the tradition, rather than kind of modernity and cleaning wines up and using a lot of chemicals, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it has. It wasn't something that, I didn't have a book of principles that I wrote down and say that this has to be like this. It was just the producers that we've been drawn to. I'm a traditionalist at heart, so everything to me, the wines have to be traditional. I don't want to see any oak. I don't want to see a modern hand through the wines. I just want to see it as they should be. So, Roagna is a classic example where ultra traditionalist, but such fantastic wine. So if you have a look through all our producers, there's a common theme in that most of them are family owned, or they're all family owned. They're hands-off winemakers, and they're true to their variety. So,
but in the limited experience I've had with the wines, obviously I'm looking forward to trying some more. They're also not kind of showboat kind of wines. No. They're not points chasing.
They're not forced wines.
Yeah. They're not trying to be anything that they're not.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And it's funny, I was having a chat to a fellow importer at our Barolo tasting yesterday, and he said a retailer, buys wine off him depending on points. And as an importer, the last thing I think about are points.
Yeah.
If a wine gets 83
Vintage
points
reports, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, if a wine gets 83 points from Galliani and I love the wine, I'll import it.
Yeah.
Obviously, you have to be true to yourself. You can't import wine on points. Selling wine on points is a very dangerous thing. You have to back yourself and back your judgment, and your customers, you have to let your customers should know that they should back you. So, if we say something's good at a retail level or a wholesale level, I think, we get heard because we're happy to put ourselves and stand behind those wines. So regardless if they get great points or they get average points.
You talked about the challenges, I guess, but also the rewards in terms of having the retail side of the business, to introduce customers and being able to establish a relationship with people, so they're coming back and they're saying, oh, Anthony, that wine you recommended was fantastic. What else have you got? Introduce me to something else. How difficult did you find it in terms of the trade, in terms of, sommeliers, restaurateurs, and other retailers?
No, not hard at all. I think...
Were they just sort of ready to sort of see these kind of wines, do you think?
Yeah, I think they were. Yeah, I think, definitely. I think, my family own a winery, a retail outlet, and an import business.
Yeah.
But we've made it clear along the whole way through, and with Hoddles, in regards to allocation, Boccaccio gets the last allocation. It goes out to everyone else first.
Okay.
We've made sure there's been no conflicts of interest, and it's just worked unbelievably well. So I think just having that vertical integration where people know that we make wine, that we import wine, that we sell wine, I think, we cover all aspects, and I think it's just not something that's been frowned upon. It's been something that's been embraced. So, we made our own wine out of Montalcino this year, 1,800 bottles, and it was snapped up by the trade within a week. I think 1,700 bottles went out to the trade, and, Boccaccio got 100 bottles. I think my younger brother was going to use that. You got one of them. My younger brother was going to use that wine for his wedding, and he missed out because, Boccaccio was the last one to get an allocation. So I think, the way we've done it has been, really, really good. So I think, Hoddles was a great experience for us in working out how to separate all our businesses and to keep everything separate and fair. And I think Mondo's been a natural progression from there.
Yeah, well, I particularly like with these Montalcino wines, and I also got a bottle of the Chianti and the Prosecco as well.
Yeah.
These beautiful, bright, really eye-catching labels. Putting them onto stuff like Instagram, people sort of said, "Oh, those pretty
Yeah.
labels." What was the kind of the idea behind sort of doing those wines?
Well, I've always loved the wines, and it's working with our producers to say, like and it's this sort of split into two with the existing wines. I absolutely love the wine, but visually, you have to have everything. You can't have one aspect, not the other. So, one of the wineries, Umberto Prosecco, I went to the winery and said, I absolutely love your Prosecco, but that label is, not something that I love. So, I would like to design our own label and to market out in our own way. And maybe for the first, one or two emails and phone calls, there was a bit of, they were a bit unsure. But after they saw what we'd planned, it's now the opposite. So, with existing wines to, present it as we want it presented, it's been fantastic. And then also, taking it one step further as an importer to not only buy finished wine, but actually to go through after vintage and go to these wineries and say, that is an amazing barrel. Please don't blend that barrel back with the other 15 barrels. Keep that barrel separate, keep it hands off, bottle it in a certain way, and we'll buy that barrel and produce it under our own label. And that's what we've done with Fratelli Dana. And yeah, it's been fantastic. So early next year, there's a 2010 Brunello, which will come out.
Wow.
And they're the sort of things that we love doing. I think in anything in life and in business, you can't stand still. As I said, in 5 years' time, we might have another business in food and wine, but we'll always evolve. I'm not the sort of person that, if I'm on the phone, getting me to sit still is very, very hard. I like to walk around and pace, and my mind is always thinking. And I use the same philosophy in life and in business. And yeah, there's always something new and exciting that I've got in my head that I want to do. So they might sometimes work, might not work, but I'll always give it a crack. And I'm very lucky that I've had a father that, with me and my brothers and my sister, that he's never ever said, do this or don't do that. With Mondo, he's never said, I don't want you to do that. He's always let us do whatever we want. Same at a vineyard level, Franco's always had 100% control. And I think as a father, I know that is such a hard thing to do because he's established the business. He's the one that's taken all the risk. He's let his kids become involved in the business and have a major say. And in doing that, he's never pressured us or said that you have to take it down a certain path, which is unbelievable. So.
Something that I have a theory on the kind of increase in interest and the consumers actually buying and drinking, enjoying Italian wine has come from the increase in Italian varieties being worked with in Australia in terms of the wines. Sangiovese is now a variety that people are a lot more familiar with, even though they might not necessarily know that it's Chianti or Brunello, that kind of thing. Do you think that has made a bit of an impact?
I do, but I also think that there's an issue, and that one thing that really gets me annoyed, it probably works in my favour, but how can I import Montepulciano or Greco or Fiano or Sangiovese and sell it at a cheaper price than what we produce it in Australia?
Just because it's Australian.
If I was an Australian producer, I would make sure that my Sangiovese or my Prosecco wasn't at a price where it's double the price of some fantastic Chianti or Prosecco. And I think that is one area where, we've let ourselves down in Australia by planting these varieties. I think pricing has to be looked at to say, right, how can you expect people to buy your wine when you can buy the real deal at half the price?
I guess that is kind of the challenge in the sense that these are entirely new varieties they're working with in the vineyards. For one thing, that they're not necessarily as familiar about how it's going to be best expressed in their, for lack of a better word, terroir. But also the kind of the best way to stylistically make the wine. I do agree to a certain extent that the locally made Italian varietal wines don't cut the mustard, and they're also going to be more expensive, possibly because it takes a bit of investment to completely propagate new varieties, new vines in a vineyard. In this day and age, costs are much higher than, say, the 1970s and 80s when there was a lot more stuff going in. I think yeah, it is a bit tough though for people. I think to a certain extent though, people still want to buy Australian.
Yeah, look, I think if it was priced in a different way, and that you would allow people to try some, fantastic Neros from Australia that are $15, rather than having to spend $25 or $30. I think those Italian varietals are now all grown in fantastic regions in Australia. I think the only thing letting us down is pricing. And I'm not saying that. I'm saying that, to me, as the pricing stands at the moment, it benefits me. As an importer, I can sell wines at $10 less a bottle than the Australian varieties. But I would love to see, some of these wineries or someone come out with Nero or Aglianico or at, $15 that you'd say, God, we can actually do this in Australia for the same price.
It's tough. It takes, I think, someone with a bit of economy of scale, maybe someone who's been around for long enough that they're not sort of sitting on huge amounts of debt, that they can kind of sacrifice a little bit of margin to kind of establish that product.
I agree.
But the big guys who are doing it aren't making particularly good wines.
I agree, but you look at the Hoddles example and how we price Pinot and Chardonnay, especially Pinot, very, very hard variety to grow. Wickham's Road, which sells out in, say, 2 months of the year, retail at $17 or $18. These varieties don't have to be expensive. With, I don't know. I don't. It could be a conversation for a whole nother podcast. But I think it's it's something that's
more than happy to have you back on.
Yeah, something that has to be looked at.
Have you guys thought about planting some Italian varieties, or do you have any Italian varieties planted up in?
We've got the only sort of variety that's out is Pinot Blanc. That's the only thing, and I think we've been careful to plant varieties that suit our climate out of Hoddles. So if there was an Italian variety, red or white, that I thought, or that Franco thought would go fantastically well at the vineyard, we'd probably look at it. So it's one of those things where, look, at the moment, no, but if there was something that jumped at us, we'd consider it.
I'd be interested to see how you guys would produce an Italian, because there's not a lot of Italian varietal ones coming out of the Yarra Valley.
No, there's not. Steve Webber makes a neb. Luke Lambert makes a neb. Yearing Station have been playing around with Sangiovese and neb for a while, but I don't think they've hit the heights of Luke Lambert.
No.
So look, it will be interesting, and that's as the Yarra Valley changes and the climate changes, it's something that other varietals which weren't something that we would consider 5 or 10 years ago, or even 2 years ago, will come into consideration.
Well, I look forward to seeing how things change. But Anthony, I really appreciate your time. Like I said, thank you very much for joining me. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you and with all the businesses?
Just by Instagram's a fantastic way of following us. So Instagram.
So at Boccaccio Cellars,
or just Boccaccio? At Boccaccio Cellars, so without the S. And then my Instagram account is Anthdana, so ANTHDANNA.
Right.
So, and you'll get the full aspect of what we do and what we love doing.
And there'll be links to the various websites through there as well.
Yeah, you can get all through there.
Fantastic. Well, all the best for Christmas and the new year. I look forward to catching up with you again. And thanks very much.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for listening to the Vincast. As always, guys, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Intrepid Wino, and you can follow the podcast on Twitter at the Vincast. Jump onto Facebook, facebook.com/Intrepid Wino, and you can like my page there. You can jump onto the website, intrepidwino.com. That's got all the previous episodes of the podcast, as well as lots and lots of writings that I've done in the past. But I always appreciate you guys jumping onto iTunes or Stitcher and subscribing to the podcast. And whilst you're there, please do leave a rating and review. It does help me out. And get in contact. Ask me some questions you'd like answered on the podcast, or suggest some potential guests. But otherwise, until next time, bye.